My name is Maya Hartwell, and I was 23 the year I realized my life wasn't meant to be equal to anyone else in my family. I had grown up in a house where everything was measured: grades, posture, piano notes, ballet scores. My parents, Victor and Marianne Hartwell, ran the home like a gallery where only one exhibit mattered: my younger sister, Isabella. She was 15 years younger than me, but somehow always got the golden glow that I had been chasing my whole life. I remember that morning vividly. The sun had barely risen, and the city outside my window was still quiet. I had woken up early, hopeful, because today wasn't just any day. It was the day I had planned to finalize my wedding details. Adrian, my boyfriend of 3 years, had been waiting with me to review the venue layouts. The plans had been set for months. But before I could even sip my coffee, my mother appeared at the doorway. Her perfectly pressed dress and her hair like silk contrasted sharply with my pajamas and messy hair. "Maya," she said, her voice cold, almost rehearsed. "Victor and I have something to tell you." I felt my stomach tighten. I had a sense that whatever came next wouldn't be good. "You know we've always wanted what's best for you," she continued, walking into the kitchen and placing her hands on the counter beside my coffee mug. "But we've decided." "Decided what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She glanced at the envelope she had in hand. "Regarding your wedding, your sister's upcoming ballet retreat is during the same week as your wedding date." I froze. I blinked. "Your wedding?" I asked carefully, unsure if I had heard correctly. "Yes," she said softly, almost like she was reciting a script. "Your father and I feel that you should consider changing the date. The family comes first." I closed my eyes. "The family includes me," I said slowly. "But you're saying I need to adjust for Isabella's retreat." "Yes," my mother said. Her voice hardened. "It's a prestigious event. She might get noticed by international scouts. And this is bigger than your wedding." I didn't laugh. I didn't shout. I just felt a cold wave of disbelief sweep over me. "So because of her, my wedding doesn't matter." "Not mattering isn't the word," my mother whispered. "It's about humility." Humility. That word had been thrown at me my entire life. When I chose art instead of business. When I moved out to live on my own. When I fell in love with Adrian, a man they deemed insufficiently prestigious. I glanced at Adrian, who had been silent at the table. His hands were folded, his gaze calm but unwavering. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone gave me a strange, unspoken strength. "And if I refuse?" I asked. My mother's face hardened. "Then we will not attend. And we will not provide the support we promised." The words hit me like bricks. $500 for my wedding, while Isabella would get $250,000. My chest tightened, and my hands curled into fists. Adrian's hand found mine. Warm, solid, reassuring. "I understand," I said. "You're serious." "Yes," she whispered. And just like that, my family withdrew from my life, or at least from the part that mattered most to me. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply sat down at the table, letting the silence wash over me. And for the first time, I realized something profound. My worth wasn't dictated by my family. My happiness wouldn't come from them. I looked at Adrian. "We're going to do this our way," I said, the first spark of rebellion lighting inside me. He smiled faintly. "I know." For the first time, I felt what it meant to truly take control of my life. Leaving the house and building a new life. The morning I left my parents' house, the air felt unusually sharp. 23 years of living in the same golden-painted rooms, the same polished floors, and the same hushed judgment had finally accumulated into something unbearable. My chest felt tight, my hands clammy, yet there was a strange clarity in my mind. Today, I was walking out of a life that had been dictated by someone else's definition of worth. I packed a single suitcase, just the essentials. Clothes, my sketchbooks, a few favorite novels, and a photograph of Adrian and me from the first night we had stayed up talking until sunrise. That photograph had become a small talisman for me, a reminder that the world outside my family's expectations still existed, and it could be beautiful. Adrian was with me, silent but steady, as he had been every day since we met. He helped me close the door behind me, and for the first time, the house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum of missed opportunities, silent scolding, and impossible comparisons. Isabella had been perfect from birth, and my failures, minor or imagined, had always loomed like shadows in her light. We didn't speak much on the cab ride downtown. The city was waking up, cars honking, street vendors setting up stalls, the distant rumble of construction blending into the usual hum. It was chaotic, vibrant, alive, everything my old house had never been. When we reached the apartment I had rented, a tiny, dimly lit studio with a view of the alley behind the building, I took a deep breath. It was small, cramped, the walls were scuffed, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, it felt like freedom. Adrian set down the bags and wrapped me in a hug. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "No one can take this from you." I nodded, though my chest was tight. "I hope so," I murmured. "But leaving doesn't erase the years of everything." He pressed his forehead to mine. "No, it doesn't. But it does start something new." Over the next few weeks, life became a strange mixture of exhilaration and emptiness. I spent hours at the local coffee shop, sketching, writing, and planning the wedding Adrian and I would have, not the one my parents envisioned. I found work at a small graphic design studio downtown. It paid barely enough to cover rent, but it gave me independence. And independence, I realized, was the first taste of real power I had ever experienced. My friend Leila Monroe became my lifeline. She had known me since college and understood what it meant to be invisible in your own family. She helped me assemble invitations, scout venues, and even negotiate with vendors, all while listening patiently as I replayed the scenes of my parents' betrayal over and over. "You're letting them win by feeling small," Leila said one afternoon as we sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by wedding catalogs. "And that's not going to happen. Not with you." I smiled weakly. It feels like revenge sometimes, but also validation. I just want to feel like I matter. "You will," she said firmly. "Not because of them, but because of who you are. And trust me, the world notices people like you." Then came Clara Cole, Adrian's older sister. Where Leila was fire, Clara was steel. She didn't tolerate excuses or self-pity. She helped me organize the finances I had scraped together, pointed out flaws in our plans I hadn't seen, and introduced me to professionals who could turn my modest apartment wedding into something remarkable. "You're not just planning a wedding," Clara told me once. "You're making a statement." I hadn't thought about it that way. A statement? Perhaps. But what statement? That I existed. That my happiness mattered. That my parents' favoritism didn't define my life. "Yes," I said quietly. "All of that." Even as I built this new life, I couldn't escape the shadow of my family. Every holiday card that arrived in the mailbox felt like a reminder of absence. Every social media post featuring Isabella's achievements stabbed at something raw inside me. And yet, Adrian reminded me constantly. We were building a future, not dwelling in the past. One evening, as we finalized seating charts for the wedding, Adrian paused and looked at me. "You're different now," he said. "How so?" Calm, fierce. You've stopped looking for their approval, and that makes you unstoppable. I laughed softly. Fierce? That's a scary word. No, he said gently. It's freeing. The day before the wedding, I walked past the old house. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement from a sudden rainstorm. In the darkened windows, I could just barely see silhouettes moving. My mother and Isabella, probably preparing for some celebration, laughing as if I had never existed. For a moment, old anger flared, but I let it pass. I had a choice. I could rage. I could cry. Or I could step into my own light. And I did. Because tomorrow, Adrian and I would stand before our friends, our chosen family in the world, not as the overlooked daughter and rebellious boyfriend, but as the architects of a wedding that no one would forget. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. The wedding day prep and unexpected guests. The morning of my wedding, I woke up before the sun. 25 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of anticipation without the crushing weight of fear. My parents weren't coming. They'd sent their judgment and favoritism like invisible chains, but I had cut them off years ago. Today, the only approval I cared about came from me, Adrian, and the people who actually loved me. I tiptoed into the living room. Adrian was already there, staring at the tiny wedding planning notebook we'd been obsessing over for months. He looked up when I entered, a small, knowing smile on his face. "Morning, bride," he said softly. "Are you ready to make everyone else jealous?" I laughed, the sound light but shaky. Outside, the city hummed quietly. The streets were beginning to stir with the Saturday crowd, unaware that a small apartment on the 5th floor held the calm before a storm. Leila Monroe arrived soon after, her energy as chaotic as ever. She burst into the apartment with 3 large boxes in her arms. "Okay, here's everything you never knew you needed." I raised an eyebrow. "What's in the boxes?" "Decor, lights, tiny surprises, and a few things I've secretly added to your wedding arsenal." She winked. "You're welcome." Clara Cole followed shortly, her presence immediately grounding. Where Leela was fire, Clara was ice, efficient, precise, unflappable. She handed me a folder of emergency plans. "If something goes wrong, this fixes it," she said, flipping through pages. "Trust me, you'll need it." Adrian chuckled. "Between the 3 of you, this wedding might just be a military operation." I smiled, but my chest tightened. Despite all the planning, all the friends, and all the love around me, there was still the lingering echo of my parents' absence. The $500 versus $250,000, the whispered words, the feeling that my happiness had never mattered to them. I shoved the thought aside. Today wasn't about them. It was about me, Adrian, and the life we were starting together. By mid-afternoon, the venue team had arrived. Marcus Bennett, our wedding planner, was a tornado of ideas and drama. He moved from table to table, rearranging flowers, adjusting lights, and loudly declaring, "This wedding will be remembered forever." I watched him for a moment and realized something. This wedding wasn't just a party. It was a statement. Every flower, every candle, every carefully chosen song was a declaration that I existed, that my life mattered, and that the days of being invisible were over. And then, just as I was finishing up with Leela and Clara, the doorbell rang. I frowned. I'm not expecting anyone. Leela grabbed the handle. "Oh, you'll want to see this." When I opened the door, I froze. It was them, my mother and sister. My mother, impeccably dressed, her makeup perfect, her expression carefully neutral. Isabella, my younger sister, holding a small bouquet of flowers, eyes wide and slightly red, like she'd been crying. I stepped back, unsure what to do. Adrian placed his hand on the small of my back, steadying me. "It's okay," he whispered. My mother spoke first. "Maya, we just wanted to see." "See what?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. "The life you've refused to acknowledge." Isabella shifted, looking at the apartment, the boxes, the chaos. "Mom, why don't I have that?" Her voice cracked, and I realized she was genuinely confused. She didn't understand that privilege had been handed to her whole life, while I had fought for every step. I swallowed. The urge to speak my mind, to lash out, was strong. But I breathed. I looked at Adrian. He nodded slightly. Calm, strong. "It's not about having," I said finally. "It's about making. About building. And this is ours." My mother's lips pressed together, and Isabella's eyes widened. They hadn't expected this response. That was when I realized something important. They weren't here to celebrate. They were here to witness. And what they witnessed wasn't shame or embarrassment. It was pride, power, and joy, the kind that comes from finally taking control of your own story. By the time guests started arriving, the apartment had transformed into something magical. Fairy lights twinkled like stars, candles flickered along the tables, and soft music floated through the air. Friends, colleagues, and distant relatives, all of whom had been quietly supporting me for years, marveled at the sight. Everyone smiled, laughed, and danced, completely oblivious to the tension outside. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "They'll never forget this." And he was right. Because this wedding wasn't just a ceremony. It was a statement, a rebellion, a celebration of a woman who had been told she didn't deserve happiness and decided anyway that she did. And somewhere in the crowd, my parents realized, absence doesn't erase presence. Money doesn't create love, and control doesn't define success. The reception hall was buzzing. Soft golden lights bounced off the walls, reflecting in every guest's eyes. The music hummed in the background, a carefully curated playlist by Leela that alternated between soft, emotional melodies and upbeat, rebellious anthems. I stood at the edge of the room, my heart hammering. This was it, the moment that would either be ordinary or unforgettable. Adrian squeezed my hand. "You're ready," he whispered. "I hope so," I said. Guests began arriving. Friends, coworkers, distant cousins, people I had never expected to see at my wedding. Leela and Clara moved around the room like choreographers, making sure every detail was perfect. The table settings, the candles, the flowers, even the strategic placement of my grandmother, Eleanor, near the front. And then they arrived. Victor and Marianne Hartwell, my parents. They didn't march in. They didn't knock on the door. They simply appeared, like shadows at the edge of a bright day, their eyes scanning the room with the expectation that everyone would see them as the arbiters of importance. I felt a pang briefly, but Adrian's hand tightened around mine. "It's okay," he murmured. "They're just spectators." I nodded. Spectators. That's all they were. The ceremony began. I walked down the aisle, my dress flowing like a river of light. Every step, every glance at the guests, reminded me that this day belonged entirely to me. No judgment, no favoritism, no invisible chains. Adrian waited at the end, his expression calm and reassuring. When our eyes met, a quiet understanding passed between us. This was ours. After the vows came the speeches. My grandmother stood first, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. She didn't mince words. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "some of you may know me as Eleanor Hartwell, Maya's grandmother. And yes, I am known for being blunt, impatient, and occasionally terrifying. But today, I have something to say. Some people think control defines love. Others think wealth defines happiness. But this young woman, she gestured toward me, has proven them wrong. Gasps ran through the room, and I caught a glimpse of my parents' stiff faces. Victor and Marianne, she continued, her voice sharp, you taught her what she shouldn't tolerate. And she listened, she learned, and she is thriving. Not because of your approval, not because of money, not because of favors, but because she refused to let absence define her life. My chest tightened. I swallowed hard. This was the moment. Then Adrian stood, quietly at first, letting the room settle. And when he spoke, it was with such clarity and calm that everyone leaned in. Maya, he said, is extraordinary. Not because she had privileges handed to her. Not because she was told she was perfect, like some people we know. She is extraordinary because she carved her own path, because she refused to accept the limitations others imposed on her, because she built a life and a wedding that reflect her strength, her beauty, and her determination. And anyone who cannot see that, he paused, eyes locking on my parents, has been blinded by their own insecurities and pride. The room went silent, absolute silence. Even the background music seemed to pause. I looked at my parents. Their expressions faltered. Victor's jaw tightened. Marianne's eyes watered, but it wasn't remorse. It was recognition of a truth they had never wanted to acknowledge. Isabel looked at me, confused, trying to understand the reality she had never had to face. That life wasn't about how much you're given. It's about what you make. I felt a surge of power, not the cruel kind, but the kind that comes from finally being seen. Finally being heard. Finally standing in a room where the past could not touch me. The applause that followed was thunderous. Friends, colleagues, even some distant relatives who had quietly observed my family's favoritism, rose to their feet. My grandmother grinned at me from the front row. Leela cheered wildly, waving a napkin like a flag. Clara gave a small, satisfied nod. Adrian took my hand, pressing his lips to mine. And in that moment, I understood fully. This wasn't just a wedding. This was a declaration. A statement. A rebellion. A life reclaimed. My parents left early, quietly, without another word. But their absence no longer hurt. Not anymore. Because I had everything I had ever wanted. My voice, my love, my dignity, and the life I had fought to create. And for the first time, I realized something. Winning isn't about taking from others. Winning is about finally standing in your own light. The day after the wedding, the city felt different. Not the city itself. Its streets were the same, the hum of traffic unchanged. But my world had shifted. I walked through the small coffee shop near my apartment, sipping a latte, and realized I was smiling for no reason at all. No one had to validate me, no one had to notice me, and yet I felt fully alive. Adrian walked beside me, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his eyes soft and proud. "How does it feel?" he asked. I paused, taking a deep breath. It feels like finally breathing after years underwater. Over the next few weeks, messages started pouring in. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers, reached out to tell me that our wedding, our story, had inspired them. One message, simple and quiet, struck me the most. "Your story made me feel less alone." I stared at the screen for a long time, realizing that perhaps that had always been the point. Not revenge, not proving anything to my parents, not even the wedding itself. It was about connection. About showing people that it's possible to rise above favoritism, neglect, and unfairness. My parents never apologized. They never tried to reach out, not really. I didn't need them to. The hurt they caused had once seemed insurmountable. But standing in my own life, I realized something important. Their absence did not define my happiness. Isabella tried to contact me weeks later, her voice trembling. Maya, I don't understand. Why didn't I get what you have? I smiled faintly, not with cruelty, but with quiet strength. Because life isn't about what's handed to you, Isabella. It's about what you build, what you fight for, and how you treat others along the way. She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. Some lessons aren't learned overnight. Months passed. Life unfolded like a film with endless frames of ordinary yet magical moments. Adrian and I bought a small house, not because we could flaunt wealth, but because we could call it ours. Every corner, every wall, every flower bed was a reminder that we had created something authentic. Friends became family. Leela became the sister I had never had. Clara became a mentor and confidant. My grandmother Eleanor's laughter echoed through our home, reminding me that rebellion, courage, and truth were inherited traits. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a quiet, steady joy. Not the flashy, loud kind that demanded attention, but the calm, unshakable kind that comes when you finally own your story, your choices, and your life. I knew this wasn't the end. There would be challenges, setbacks, misunderstandings, but now I had something I had never truly had before: control of my narrative. I was no longer the overlooked daughter, the one who had to beg for recognition or money. I was Maya Hartwell, a woman who had been tested by absence, by favoritism, by whispered judgments, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and free. And as I sat by the window one evening, watching the city lights twinkle like tiny promises, I whispered to myself, in my opinion, this story is more than just a tale about weddings, money, and family favoritism. It is a story about personal strength, resilience, and reclaiming your life when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally fail to do so. What stands out to me the most is Maya's journey from being overlooked and undervalued to finding her own voice. She didn't rely on apologies, recognition, or money from her parents. Instead, she built a life around her own choices, surrounded by friends who genuinely cared. That's a lesson we all need to remember. Our worth is defined not by others' validation, but by how we honor ourselves. I also appreciate how the story captures the complexity of family relationships. Maya's sister, Isabella, is not evil. She is a product of privilege and ignorance. Maya's mother and father are flawed, but their presence or absence does not ultimately determine Maya's happiness. This reflects real life, where people we expect to support us may fail, yet life continues, and we can thrive. The most inspiring part, in my opinion, is the wedding itself. It wasn't just a ceremony, it was a statement of independence, courage, and love. Adrian's support, the loyalty of friends like Leela and Clara, and Maya's own determination turned what could have been a moment of humiliation into a moment of empowerment. Finally, the story shows that healing and success are not about revenge. True triumph comes from living authentically, embracing your own narrative, and finding joy in your choices. It reminded me that every setback, every insult, and every absence can be transformed into fuel for building the life we deserve. Reading this, I felt motivated, empowered, and reassured that even when family fails, life offers second chances, new beginnings, and the power to define our own happiness. Maya's story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and a reminder that we are never truly powerless unless we let ourselves be.